So, welcome back, listeners. We're here again. So this is now part 2 of episode 7. It might actually show up as episode 8. I'm not quite sure how it all stacks up with Spotify, etc. But it is episode 7, part 2. So in the last one, we interviewed, Darran and I went over to Matlock, and we had a really good chat and a good tour around the factory with Bill Leach, who is the global sales director of John Smedley Knitware. I hope you've all listened and I hope you've all enjoyed it. I will be asking questions later. But today, Darren's off doing something fabulous. And so it's just me. And I am going to be having a good old chat with Bill again. So part 2. And we're going to be talking about the soundtrack to Bill's life in the same format as we've done on previous episodes. So Bill, welcome back. Long time no see.
Thanks, Andy. It's really good to see you again. I think both of us can be slightly jealous of the fact that Darren's sunning himself in far warmer climes than we may be.
I know.
But nonetheless, it's great to see you, and I'm looking forward to the afternoon of fun we have ahead.
Brilliant. So we were just chatting a little bit offline before we came on, and Bill was saying, and I agree because we've tried to do it ourselves, whittling this down, because what we want to do is find the defining track per decade for you. That you've been alive, and it's like that's a mammoth task, and we really struggled. So, but how'd you get on?
Toughest question I've been asked in the last 30 years. I'm an absolute music nut, and have been since being a child. My father particularly was incredibly musical, and as a consequence, I've grown up with music. I love music. Music, it's a soundtrack to my every single day. I'm one of those people that's extraordinarily emotionally connected to a piece of music at a point in time. So I'll hear a piece of music, and I'll be at an event or at something, and that will stick. That moment, that little endorphin rush, will stick with me for life, and I never lose it. I'm no longer musical from a playing perspective, but music forms a part of my every single.
But you did used to play, didn't you? You grew up playing the piano, I think you said last time.
I've got a drum kit at home, which I'm useless at. It's more the wife's thing than mine. But piano to a pretty decent level as a child. And just love it. Music's part of my everyday.
So when were you born? Let's get specific.
I was born in 1967, so I'm fortunate to say I am still a 50-something. In a couple of months' time, I'll be turning from 56 into 57. If that gives you a bit more specific.
Yeah, well, I am 57, and I was born in 66, so I'm a little bit older.
And what?
But we're still looking so young and dynamic.
Well said, that man. The 10 quid's in the post.
Excellent. Good man. So, now I notice that you started your countdown, if you like, starts in the 1970s. If I were to say, is there anything from the 60s? And I know this is off-piste and we haven't discussed this, so feel free to shoot me down. But is there anything that jumps out at you that you kind of go, actually, that for me, I know I was only 3 when the 60s ended, but if I think of the 60s, this is a kind of tune that comes to mind.
It's a funny question, that. So as I said to you earlier, my dad was extraordinarily musical, and he would drag us off, my sister and I and my mum. We'd go off to various concerts, and we did the proms, and on all we've seen Duke Ellington. But I saw Duke Ellington as I think I was probably 6 or 7. So it would have been early 70s for me. And that was, I think, the seminal moment when all of a sudden this music thing made sense. Because up to that point, I was, breaking trains and breaking things and being a general boy. I don't think music made a great deal of sense to me because it was something my dad did. I was busy climbing trees and making a fool of myself outside, whereas he would be inside and literally slaving away at the piano, which then he made me do. As it was very much, I took up piano very much at the request of my father. But
So was it just a hobby with your father, or did it have a
no, just
was it
hobby,
a
just
professional
hobby.
angle?
He was
Right,
extraordinarily into classical music,
right.
and I took piano lessons for nearly 10, 11 years. And it was two a week, and it was practicing for an hour and a half
Wow.
every single day. And I got to one, I believe it was one grade less than concert standard, but never actually ended up in a concert.
Really, you didn't? So you
No,
never performed?
no,
No,
no.
you didn't join a band or
No, I
anything?
think I was pretty keen to get away from it and go and do something
Really?
else.
Oh, what a shame. I bet you look, but do you look back now? Like, it is, I'm sure the most common regret for most people is, oh, I wish I'd have stuck with the piano, or I wish I'd learned guitar,
You've
or,
nailed it.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's my only regret I have when
yeah,
I go to a wedding or some big function in the hotel, and I'll see a
yeah,
baby grand or a grand piano tucked away in the corner of the bar, and I think, God, I wish I could just get up there and go and knock out some ragtime waltz or something else.
yeah,
Just something. A bit of Scott Joplin is normally a crowd pleaser, but I
yeah,
played it when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then as soon as I found sport in my
yeah,
early teens, that's when the music stopped.
yeah. And you can't play a note now.
I can knock out a few chords.
Right.
I was more somebody who played by ear, although I had to go through all the theoretical process of learning music and learning to play off paper.
Hmm.
That was something I absolutely had to do. But I love the concept, and I do the same thing on my drum kit. I'll get on there and I'll just start with it with a gentle snare and move into all sorts of other things
Yeah,
until I get tied in knots and have to give up and have a coffee.
yeah. Excellent. Well, that sounds like a good place to start.
Absolutely.
So, all right, are we avoiding the 60s then? So you're going
You
to
know,
just chuck something in?
if it was something from the 60s, I think the soundtrack to the 60s for me would have been me in the bedroom hearing my father having his Rotary Club type meeting in the lounge, and they might have had some Rolling Stones on in the background, but it all sounded
Right.
much of a muchness to me back then.
Yes.
So yeah, probably the Stones I think would be the one that stuck out from the 60s for me, but I
Yeah.
wasn't really tuned in at that point.
Yeah. No, of course. Of course. So, 70s arrive. What kind of age would you say you started rebelling?
Good one.
And
So
explain why. I mean, I've just thrown that in.
yeah.
I've got some notes here, but the listeners obviously haven't. So,
So, so,
what were you rebelling against, Bill?
I was rebelling against a lot of what I've just spoken about, in that as I became a rebellious adolescent, I think I wanted to break away from the hours of piano lessons and the church twice on a Sunday, every single Sunday, and it
Wow.
wasn't kind of my gig. I was I was a strange kid in that I grew tall quite fast. So by the time I was 13 or 14, which was, as you can imagine, toward the end of the 70s, I was getting off the rugby bus as we pulled up to another private school and being stopped by the opposing games master who was saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, you can't play." And I had to bring my birth certificate because I looked literally a foot taller than everybody else at that point in time.
Full beard.
And
Yeah.
not quite. But the breakaway was very much about I wanted to rebel against the classical music. I was rebelling against the piano. And when I first heard the original singer of AC/DC, the Australian rock band, Bon Scott, I thought that noise was magnificent. And I saw him on television, and I saw the cut off denim jacket and all that sort of stuff, and went, yep, that's where I'm going next. And in my early teens, it's hard to imagine now, but in my early teens, I was I was I went to an AC/DC concert wearing a school uniform, just like Angus Young. I was so into AC/DC, yeah, that band were probably the greatest way for me to step away from that thing I was rebelling against.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it just it formed. It was kind of my formative music choice because then shortly afterwards I was in the Students' Union a few years later, and I was on the SU committee, and rock and heavy rock and metal and all that stuff from you name it, from Sabbath to Saxon to Marillion to you name all those bands. But it was AC/DC that then were the kickoff, and to this day are the rock band that I listen to the most, particularly the older stuff. Pretty much up to the Back in Black days when Brian Johnson joined the band, and I believe that's the most successful rock album of all time.
I believe so. Yeah.
But beyond that, I kind of lost interest and moved into other things because I knew I had to.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I've listened to your playlist. So because we've gone through it ourselves. We've done our own playlists, and my early 70s were that kind of Black Sabbath, AC/DC. Went to see them both. I think Sabbath was my first gig at Bingley Hall, but yeah, just listening to Highway to Hell, which is your tune. It's got it takes you back, doesn't it? This thing about music, it really puts you into that moment. I remember being at school, and I remember that album actually was given to me by some kid at school. And I think he probably stole it off his brother or something. And he came and said, I want you to have this. And I go, I can't take that, And he's going, no, really, I want you to. So anyway, that's how I acquired the Highway to Hell.
Absolutely. Well, I remember. I talked about that attending an AC/DC concert, wearing the school uniform, and Highway to Hell, and that whole album was it. And then I went on a tour. I think it was called If You Want Blood tour, and they played that live. And when I saw that band with all the original members. Playing that track, it was a moment. Even now, the hairs on the back of my neck have gone up. One of those absolutely amazing moments, and will stick with me forever.
Brilliant. So, you had a choice actually for your 70s, and you put Highway to Hell or Paranoid. What was that? What shifted you away from the Sabs?
So good question. So I did have another choice, which was the obvious Paranoid by Sabbath, and again, one of the most difficult questions I've been asked is to narrow down my shortlist, because when Andy and Darran gave me here's the brief. A track from each decade in your year, and I throw you back about 20 tracks. I mean, that's not quite, I've got the maths wrong there somewhere, because it was a tough question to start with, even tougher to narrow down. Why did I pick AC/DC Highway to Hell rather than Black Sabbath and Paranoid? Easy. If I had to listen to only one of those tracks back to back on a desert island for the rest of my living days, in that decade, it would be Highway to Hell, AC/DC.
Amazing. And I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you at the end of this, let's choose. We're not on a desert island. We're on a rocket ship. We're going around. We're going to Mars. But you can only take one track with you out of all of your decades.
I already know that.
Excellent. So moving on, so that's 1970s, 1980s. Now, wow. I mean, what's very interesting is the way that you've been telling your story, and I'm getting a real picture of you and your life. Public school, rugby team bus, church twice on Sundays, piano lessons till the age of 11. I can picture this little Bill.
Yep.
And then you hit me with this one.
Yeah.
So just explain this.
So I think I explained earlier in the conversation. I'm one of those human beings that's enormously affected by the moment, and if that moment happens to be a very emotional or very spiritual or very whatever, and there's a piece of music that comes with it, well, that also is tattooed for life. And this is a beautiful piece of music called Enigma Variations, otherwise known as Nimrod, by Elgar. Couldn't really be much more different to AC/DC Highway to Hell, but nonetheless, in the 80s, when I was allowed to watch television, I eventually watched a very famous film from those days called Platoon, one of Willem Dafoe's first ever movies. And for anybody who has watched it, you will know the scene. It's right at the end. For anybody who hasn't watched Platoon, it's a deeply moving moment in a film where the last man standing on the battlefield is about to be helivacked, as they called it, evacuated by helicopter. And there was an extraordinarily emotional moment when all of a sudden Enigma Variations Nimrod by Elgar is played at that same time. And I'd urge you, if you haven't seen it, just go and watch it. It's a classic film. Divisive because of the subject matter, I'm sure, but nonetheless, probably Willem Dafoe's greatest ever performance.
It's interesting that they chose Nimrod as well, because for me, it's such an English sound, and so it shouldn't work.
It shouldn't work.
Actually, really does. But that kind of emotion that comes with the music just reminded me actually of my dad, who, we were at the Manchester Art Gallery. And there was a kind of an exhibition piece. So there was paintings by Gerhard Richter and live music, which was created especially for the Gerhard Richter paintings by a guy called Arvo Pärt. And we went in and we were looking at all the paintings and stuff, and we were thinking, where's the choir going to go? And suddenly it was like one of those bomb things, and the person next to you started singing, and then somebody else started, and it was in, and my old dad just started crying.
Yeah.
It was but it was beautiful.
Yeah.
The whole moment, and it'll stay with me forever. That kind of that feeling, and I think you get that with Nimrod actually, and it's weird because Highway to Hell, Paranoid into Nimrod, but I know where you're going, and I don't know whether it is because we're the same age and we've possibly experienced similar things growing up or whatever. I didn't go to private school and didn't go to church twice on Sundays, and I cannot play the piano. Otherwise, we're like peas in a pod.
Do you know the funny thing about Nimrod is that you've got a house party, you've got the few hangers on towards the end of a night, and you're enjoying a nice whiskey or a brandy or something else. And I have been known towards getting towards the early hours in the morning, just to start winding down the soundtrack for the evening. Turn the lights down a little bit lower, put that on, and it really mellows people out. Right, okay, now you can get your taxis.
Yes. Now then, so that was the 80s. We now bounce into the 90s.
Well and truly.
Now, talk me through this, because I follow your trajectory. So I'm 100% with you.
There's a theme building here, which is, and the theme only came to me when I had actually finished this exercise that yourself and Darran asked me to do, and it was incredible. It was quite evocative actually, in that all of a sudden I'm scrolling down these track names, and the track, probably my favourite ever track of all time.
Ooh. Is this a rocket ship track?
Unfinished Sympathy by Massive Attack. The strings are in there, the orchestra in there, just like it was in Elgar. And this was, I think, probably the appreciation that was deep-rooted but constantly ignored by me, that I did actually like classical music because I'd grown up with it as a child. And when I watched that video, when I heard that track, when I watched that video, because in the 80s, in the 80s and the 90s, we discovered music video, didn't we? That's when it all happened. MTV,
yeah.
Video killed the radio star, and when that thing all started, and when that track came out, and I had recently made the transition. I think I'd realised that I couldn't keep wearing patchouli oil and denim cut-off jackets with rock patches stuck all over them. And perhaps even harder for you to imagine, I had really long hair.
Me too. Me too.
Really long hair. I'd started working actually as a career, ironically, on the 1st of April Fool's Day, 1984. And so I'd realised in the 80s that I couldn't keep walking around stinking of patchouli oil. and wearing huge bell bottoms and blah blah blah, and an Afghan jacket as well. Can you picture that? It's just hideous. And the only reason I covered that in patchouli was to hide the fact that it had once got wet and thereby stunk like a dead goat for the rest of its days.
A dead Afghan. Yeah.
So Massive Attack came around with that track and that video, and it was a brilliant piece because it kind of signaled my move away from rock into I need to appreciate something a bit more mainstream. Otherwise, I'm going to stay a single guy for the rest of my life.
Yes. Yeah.
So with that came the nightclubs. That was when I got really into dressing better. And taking some care in my appearance, because you couldn't, in those days, you couldn't rock up to a nightclub and wear white socks and trainers. Whereas now,
Wouldn't let you in trainers.
in those days, you had to be wearing shoes, you had to have a jacket, you had to have you had to have a collar on your shirt.
It was ridiculous.
All of those things. But this track, that video, just fantastic. I probably listened to this track more than any other piece of music ever.
So, again, you'd given us Massive Attack, Electronic, Van Morrison, and the Verve.
Yeah.
And you're taking Unfinished Sympathy, Massive Attack over the others without going into all the detail of the others. Why? Is it just of the moment? It's the thing.
Again, it's that if I forced myself onto a desert island, which of those four am I putting on loop all the way through? And it's that.
Yeah.
The other tracks that you listed, I mean, Getting Away With It by Electronic was purely symbolic of a moment in time in my career. Sports had gone crazy. Everyone was buying tracksuits and trainers. I was working for Adidas at the time. It was bonkers. We could have put 3 stripes on a pile of poodle shit and it would still have sold. It was incredible. The other track there, The Verve, is again one of my all-time favorites. But you said to me I have to pick one from the decade.
Yeah, I know. It's hard, isn't it?
Those two. And ironically, if you think about the context of both of those tunes, also both of those videos, because you've got Richard Ashcroft walking through the streets on the video in exactly the same style as done in the Massive Attack track. An iconic piece of music still used by so many TV stations nowadays. The other one you mentioned there is one that I still feel quite guilty about taking off the list, which is Van Morrison, Have I Told You Lately? I shouldn't take that off the list because it might end in my divorce, because that was my wedding song. And I've heard it performed by lots of people. Van Morrison being my favourite, Rod Stewart. Many people have done such good versions of that. But that'll be with my wife and I for the rest of our days. But the track I'm taking to that desert island is Massive Attack, Unfinished Sympathy.
Amazing. And of course, we're not on a desert island, because that might be some sort of copyright issue. And we're not going there. So we're definitely on a rocket ship. Now then, we jump to the noughties. Absolutely. And you go a bit weird. I was following you all the way and going, yeah, right, okay. Oh, hello. I mean, well, for a start, these 3 bands are bands that I didn't really listen to.
Yep.
But explain. So first of all, your 3 bands were?
Well, the 3 brands that I picked for the noughties were 07, Jurassic 5, and People Under the Stairs. And
did they not have a number? Did they not? People Under the Stairs 3.
They did used to abbreviate themselves to PUTS for obvious reasons, but no, the 07 thing was again, it was a really interesting moment, because I had just moved to the north of London into Finchley. I live in Cheshire, as you know. And I had been appointed to a role working for a really cool British fashion brand called Red or Dead. And Red or Dead had been acquired by the Pentland Group, who are my employer for 15 years. And they brought in a managing director, a guy called Paul Gill. And Paul is, to this day, one of the most creative influences over my life that I've ever had the the pleasure to enjoy. And he introduced me to a band called Zero 7, who at that time had a brilliant album, and on a track called Simple Things. That got me into chill out. So I've gone, just recap, I've gone AC/DC, Elgar. I've gone through this really interesting journey, and now all of a sudden, I'm getting into more loungy kind of chill out
Yes.
music.
Yeah, you're hanging out with a very different crowd, aren't you?
Absolutely.
That's what's happened here. This is how you've gone cool.
Very much. And Zero 7 was the band that probably opened me up to a lot more different genres of music. In that all of a sudden I had become willing. I don't know why I had become willing, but I had become more open to other styles of music that I previously hadn't. And out of that came a couple of bands, Jurassic 5 and People Under the Stairs. For those of you who don't know them, and I don't know why you would, the hip hop scene in the US was very much divided East versus West. East was often seen as being a bit more hardcore. West was seen as being a bit more fun. So I'd liken that. I'd paint the example of De La Soul were the fun side of hip hop. The Souls of Mischief probably somewhere similar, but you think Dr. Dre, all this stuff was a lot more aggressive. Well, Jurassic 5 and People Under the Stairs, two bands that just did this in a relaxed way. It was a perfect blend, I thought, of hip hop and lounge. And the track that I probably, it's number 2 on my playlist, Acid Raindrops by People Under the Stairs. It's a really cool listen. It's just chilled and cool.
It actually is, and I have to say that I'd never. I'm not cool enough, clearly, but I'd never even heard of People Under the Stairs. And I listened to Acid Raindrops, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I think it's such a cool piece of music. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's
it's easy to listen to, and that was one of those things. I was lying by a pool somewhere on holiday on the island of La Gomera in the Canary Islands, and I'd put my playlist on random, so it was picking stuff up that it thought I might like. It got that one right, and all of a sudden, I was suddenly into People Under the Stairs, and from that, I then discovered Jurassic 5, etc., etc. So that's how it came around.
Amazing. And so then, 2010s. I mean, this is interesting. This, again, you have a real roller coaster of your decades, and I'm now wondering, right, who are you hanging out with here now? What's happening? Because there's another one in here that I didn't know, and that is Session Victim.
Yep.
And I've listened to that, and I've listened to that about 5 times since I've got your because. We'll come to you. Sorry, I'm taking over, but it feels like the wind. You've got to be outside. Feels like the wind is taking that piece of music and it's blowing away over the sea or over a cityscape, but it's kind of sunny and it's got that kind of otherworldliness to it, which I think is stunning. Anyway, I jumped in. Sorry. Bad habit.
No, not at
all. So 2010s. What were your 3 bands to start with?
So that you were? I discovered a band called Elbow, and particularly the lead singer with an elbow, a guy called Guy Garvey, who is, I think, one of the best lyricists ever. He's a storyteller. He's an artist. They're artistic to go and watch as a band. I think I've seen Elbow more than any other band, and I've seen them must be 8-9 times.
I've seen them 3 times.
Elbow are more famous for the big track, One Day Like This. But I picked a track called Lippy Kids because the story of Lippy Kids and the way he tells that story through the song reminds me of when I was a child and I was struggling to become a teenager, and I wasn't sure what adolescence was, and I didn't know where I was going to be tomorrow or next month or the year afterwards, and I was just trying to get through a summer holiday and have the best time possible. And I thought Lippy Kids was everything about it. Every single sentence in that track was all about
You
it.
could identify
You
with.
can identify a summer holiday
Yeah.
in your formative teenage years when you found it, and
Yeah.
that was epic. So Elbow loved the band and still do. You mentioned Session Victim. This goes back to a moment in time. Literally, never heard the track before, never heard of them. I'm in a rooftop bar in New York. We just had a really successful couple of days' work in New York, and it was time to wind down. And we always say you should make sure you celebrate some success the right way. And we went up to the rooftop bar and just had a cocktail. And it just so happened that this track came on at the time that I was getting the cocktails from. In fact, I was watching the mixologist actually make our drinks, and this track came on, and I can still smile thinking about that particular moment. It was epic. And
Yeah.
then I discovered who Session Victim were. I literally Shazam. I think I use Shazam on my phone now more than anything else.
Me too.
That's how Session Victim came around. Shazammed it, heard it, loved it, listened to lots of their work, and I'm quite often, when I do get on a treadmill, Session Victim might be one of those things that I listen to when I'm on the treadmill.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. But then the third one, and I like this. I know we did say we weren't going to go through every single one, but it's actually really hard to take any out. But the one that the one that you're taking as your sound of the decade is Elbow Lippy Kids.
Elbow Lippy Kids.
But we need to mention this next
I've got to
one.
mention this for two reasons. I mean, they are. I saw them a couple of years ago. The fact that Pete Townsend can still rock the way he does at his age is fantastic. It should give us in our 50-somethings an awful lot to look forward to in our 70-somethings. Is The Who, Won't Get Fooled Again. You've all heard it. It's a fabulous track, one of The Who's best. But I wanted to take this at a different angle. I love seeing musicians have fun, and quite often the best fun they have is backstage when they're just riffing and they're just messing around and blah blah blah. There's an American TV show host called Jimmy Fallon, who most people know. There's an American band called Roots, and it just so happens the triumvirate of The Who, The Roots, and Jimmy Fallon did a video on YouTube of Won't Get Fooled Again, and I would urge all of you to go and search it and watch it. And if you want,
We'll post the link in our Instagram.
you've just got, I mean, talk about bring a smile to your face. It's epic. They're in this tiny, tiny room, a room full of sweaty humans, just on kids' musical instruments playing Won't Get Fooled Again. It's brilliant.
Fantastic. So then, we've just done the decade of 2010s, and now, big leap. And interestingly, for the 2020s, you've only got one tune. So it must be a killer. Tell us about it.
So, again, a moment on holiday. This time I was in the Sierra Cabrera Mountains in Spain. I'd had my earpods in. I'd gone for a long early morning walk to beat the heat. And up came this random track. I'd never heard of this band before. They're called Another Sky. They're a British brand, and as you know, me being working for a British brand in John Smedley, anything British I'm in for. And I heard this track called Brave Face by Another Sky and went, wow, they sound different, completely different to anything I've heard before, but equally right up my street. So after the first track came some more exploratory stuff, etc., etc. Got into both of it. They had an album and an EP at the time. In fact, ironically, they've just last month released a new album called Beach Day. I'm going to describe Another Sky to you as if you can imagine a tripartite agreement between Wolf Alice, Feeder, and London Grammar. there you have the descriptive of how Another Sky sound, because the lead singer Katrin has the most beautiful and spiritual voice, and she reaches highs and lows that you can't imagine. Her breadth of range vocally is amazing, but musically, I think Another Sky are probably the band that can perform all of the things that I love throughout the previous 5 decades. They got it all. It goes from rock to romance to quiet to strings, you name it. It's amazing. It's amazing. So Another Sky, I would say, on my musical discovery of the last, certainly of this decade. They're
Yeah. I mean, I have to be honest. I'd never heard of them, but I agree with what you've said about how they come over.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of an eclectic sound. You feel like you've heard it before, but then there's just something about it that you haven't. So it's got that originality, but at the same time it's kind of, it's not nostalgic. It's definitely not nostalgic, but you can see where their influences have been drawn.
Absolutely.
But I would fully recommend all our listeners get a hold of Another Sky.
They're going on tour around the UK. They're playing tiny venues, probably around about 12 cities around the UK. And I noticed on my Facebook feed that they're now doing Why Not Festival and a few other things. So in the last few months, it appears they've certainly arrived on people's radars, and they're now doing a few festivals this year. So I think Another Sky will be a band that we hear more of going forward.
Excellent. You heard it all here first, folks.
In this rocket ship.
On this rocket ship. Now then, 2023. So this is Bill's last choice, and it's interesting that you've chosen this particular recording of this tune as well. Because we've actually had this, so Darran picked this tune as one of his, but not this recording. And it's a very specific recording, and it feels and sounds actually quite different to the original, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. The track we're talking about is Live Forever, in this case by Noel Gallagher, but specifically in this case it was the Radio 2 sessions of Live Forever. I think it was recorded back in 2021. I hadn't heard it until last year, and it's the thing about, I think I'm pretty close to music, but all of a sudden you hear something like that and go, how have I not heard this before? And Noel Gallagher and this version of Live Forever on the Radio 2 sessions hit home because we lost a dear pal last year to a very aggressive brain tumour. And in that situation, we get into our 50s, and we may have lost parents, we may be losing others close to us. And I think when you're in that particular place, you can hear a piece of music that can do one of two things. It can either really upset you into a blobbing mess for a couple of hours, or it can actually uplift you. Or if you're really lucky, it can do both. And this does both. This is the one that kind of plays with your whole emotional spectrum. And our dear mate Steen, who died, we were in. He lives just outside Kolding in Denmark, and we were just walking around. He was in a hospice in a really bad way. He died around about a week to 10 days later after we'd seen him. But we'd had a lunch with him, and we'd had a chance to sit and laugh and just smile at each other and what have you. And we were walking to a restaurant with his wife that evening, quite melancholy, and we walked under this bridge, and there was some graffiti, and it said, "Don't be sad that it's over, be very happy that it happened." And it just lifted the mood, lifted the mood completely. And I've got a photograph of that. But this was the first piece of music that my wife and I heard as we were boarding our flight to come back. And it hit the feels. It was the right track, right moment, right everything, and stuck with us ever since. But for anybody who's a fan of Live Forever by Oasis, go and listen to Live Forever Radio 2 sessions by Noel Gallagher, and I'll be very surprised if it doesn't move you just a little.
It's Liam at his most. No, sorry, not Liam.
Noel Gallagher.
Yeah, it's him at his most vulnerable. I think that's the thing. It sounds really emotive and really beautiful. So That's it, Bill. We've just done your life. This is your life. And you know,
copyrighted, is it?
No, you probably, yeah. Anything that we do that sounds like we're infringing on copyright, we're really not. We didn't mean it. Yeah, no, thanks, Bill. That was really good. Really good.
Thanks to you. I've actually really enjoyed doing it. I'd never been asked that kind of question before. You've often sat around the dinner table with friends going, "Okay, top track of all time." But this was a really enjoyable exercise to do, and it helped fill an hour or two of train journeys up and down from Manchester to London across the course of the last couple of weeks. So thank you to you. I really, really enjoyed doing it.
Fantastic. However, we haven't actually decided on which is your rocket ship tune. Which is the one that you're going to take with you? You've only got one out of all of these, over all of the decades. Which one and why? Okay,
so the track that's going with me in my rocket ship, as I look at it now, I can see quite clearly is the homologation of all of the things that I love. And that is Massive Attack, Unfinished Sympathy, because it has everything. It's got the beats, it's got the strings, it's got the feels, it's got the vibe, it's got it all. And that's the track that I could genuinely listen to and actually have for many, many, many hours. I've got every version you can picture of this track, from 12-inch to remixes, the whole thing. That is my rocket ship track.
That is fantastic, Bill. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
Bill Leach, from John Smedley Knitware, superstar. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks to you, Andy, and let's raise a drink to Darran this evening in his horrible beach shorts or whatever.
Yeah, dear. I don't know. All right for some, isn't it?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
All the best to you.
It's been really nice chatting. Thanks so much again to Bill. If you want to email us, get in touch. Please do email us at 50somethingpodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is available on all of your favourite podcast channels, including Spotify, Apple Play, Google Play, etc., etc.
The 50 Something Podcast.
Because things happen in your 50s.